I stared at the china plate shattered across my mother-in-law's pristine hardwood floor, cranberry sauce splattered like a crime scene. The holiday music playing in the background suddenly felt mocking as everyone at the table fell silent. "Oh my goodness, I'm so clumsy," Jessica, my sister-in-law, exclaimed with theatrical shock, her hand flying to her mouth. But I caught that slight smirk before she masked it with concern. This wasn't an accident. I had seen her deliberate movement as she reached for the salt, her elbow perfectly aligned with my plate. The same Jessica who had been a professional tennis player in college suddenly couldn't control her limbs at the dinner table. I felt my husband David's hand squeeze my thigh under the table. "Just stay quiet," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Don't ruin the evening." The Andersons' Christmas dinner was the highlight of their social calendar. Perfect decorations adorned their Boston mansion. A towering 12-foot Christmas tree dominated the living room, and the dining table was a masterpiece of holiday perfection until my dinner ended up on the floor. "I'll get something to clean this up," I said, starting to rise. No, dear, you just sit there." My mother-in-law Margaret waved dismissively. "Consuela will handle it." She snapped her fingers, and their housekeeper appeared instantly, as if she'd been waiting for something to go wrong. With me. Again. "I'm so sorry about your dinner, Emma," Jessica said with that sugary voice that never reached her eyes. "Should I make you another plate?" Before I could answer, David jumped in. "That's fine. Emma wasn't that hungry anyway, were you, honey?" I stared at my husband of 3 years. The man who had once promised to stand by me through anything was now throwing me under the bus to keep peace with his family. Again. "Actually, I was starving," I said quietly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Margaret's perfectly Botoxed eyebrows attempted to rise in surprise. David's father, Richard, cleared his throat. "Well, I think we should continue. The turkey will get cold." And just like that, conversation resumed around me while I sat with an empty place setting. Jessica launched into a story about her recent charity gala, carefully enunciating the names of Boston's elite who had attended. Margaret nodded approvingly, occasionally glancing at me as if to remind me of what I wasn't. I wasn't from their world. I'd grown up in a small town in Pennsylvania, daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse. I met David when I was catering an event at his law firm, still working my way through culinary school. Our worlds couldn't have been more different, but he'd sworn that didn't matter. Yet here I sat, hungry and humiliated, while my husband pretended nothing was wrong. "Margaret, the turkey is divine," Richard announced. "You've outdone yourself this year." "Thank you, dear. Though I can't take all the credit, the butcher at Pemberton's personally selected this bird for me." I watched them eat, feeling increasingly invisible. David avoided eye contact, focusing intently on his plate. The holiday lights reflected in the crystal glasses, casting rainbow patterns across the table that once would have delighted me. Now they just highlighted the divide between us. Consuela finished cleaning the mess and disappeared back to the kitchen. She hadn't brought me a replacement plate. Nobody seemed to notice or care. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, marking each painful minute. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, coating Boston in a pristine white blanket. I remembered how excited I'd been earlier today, watching the first flakes appear as we drove to his parents' house. David had squeezed my hand then, promising this Christmas would be different. It was different, all right. It was worse. I thought about all the holidays with my own family. Our modest home in Pennsylvania, filled with laughter and mismatched decorations collected over decades. My mum's slightly overcooked turkey that we all pretended was perfect. Dad telling the same corny jokes year after year. No one went hungry at our table. No one was made to feel less than. How had I ended up here? When David and I met, he'd been different. Charming, kind, interested in my world as much as I was in his. He'd surprised me at culinary school one day with flowers, sitting through my entire final exam presentation, beaming with pride. That David seemed like a distant memory now. Jessica, tell everyone about the governor's wife asking for your interior design advice, Margaret prompted, her voice dripping with pride. Jessica launched into another self-congratulatory story. I tuned her out, focusing instead on the family photos lining the mantel. The Andersons in Martha's Vineyard, the Andersons in the Alps, the Andersons at David's law school graduation. Not a single photo with me in it, despite 3 Christmases, 3 Thanksgivings, countless family events where I'd smiled until my face hurt, hoping to be accepted. "Emma," David whispered, noticing my gaze, "please don't make a scene." I turned to him, studying his face, the slight clench in his jaw, the way his eyes darted nervously between me and his father, always seeking approval, always afraid of rocking the boat. "When did you become this person?" I whispered back. He frowned. "What are you talking about?" "This shell of a man, so afraid of disappointing them that you'll let them walk all over me. You're overreacting. Jessica didn't mean to." "Don't." I cut him off. "Don't lie to me and don't lie to yourself." David's gaze hardened. "Can we just get through dinner? We'll talk about this at home." "There's nothing on my plate to get through, David. Or did you forget that too?" Something inside me shifted. 3 years of trying to fit into this family, of David's constant reassurances that they just need time to accept me. 3 years of Jessica's barely disguised contempt, Margaret's condescension, and Richard's polite indifference. The way David shrank in their presence, becoming someone I barely recognized. I'd had enough. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. All eyes turned to me. David looked panicked. "Emma, what are you doing?" he hissed. I looked around the table at each of them. Jessica's smug expression, Margaret's annoyed one. Richard had actually stopped mid-chew. "I have something to say," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "And I think it's long overdue." "Emma," David warned, his voice low but sharp. "Sit down." I ignored him, my gaze sweeping around the table. "For 3 years, I've tried to be part of this family. I've smiled through your backhanded compliments, Margaret. I've endured your deliberate exclusion, Jessica. I've accepted your dismissive attitude, Richard." The shock on their faces might have been comical if it wasn't so painful. No one in the Anderson family was ever confronted. "You come into our home and create a scene at Christmas dinner." Margaret's voice was ice cold. "This is exactly the sort of behavior you expected from someone like me," I finished for her. "Someone who didn't attend boarding school, someone who had to work her way through college instead of having Daddy pay for it." Richard put down his fork with deliberate slowness. "Young lady, I think you're being highly inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" I laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "What's inappropriate is watching your daughter deliberately knock food onto your hardwood floors and saying nothing. What's inappropriate is allowing your wife to treat your daughter-in-law like she's the help." Jessica's face flushed crimson. "That was an accident. David, are you going to let her talk to us this way?" David stood up too, his face a mask of conflict. "Emma, please, let's just calm down and—" "No, David, I won't calm down. Not anymore." I turned to face him fully. 3 years ago, you promised me that your family would come around. That they just needed time to accept that you didn't marry the Boston debutante they had picked out for you, but they never intended to accept me, and you know it. Margaret's perfectly manicured hand gripped her wineglass so tightly I thought it might shatter. David has always had certain expectations to live up to. The Anderson name carries responsibilities. And I'm not good enough for the precious Anderson name, is that it? I asked, though we all knew the answer. You said it, not me, Jessica muttered. I turned to her. You know what, Jessica? I feel sorry for you. You're 35 years old and still desperately trying to please Mommy and Daddy. Is that why you're still single? Because no man measures up to Daddy's standards? Or is it because they all see through your perfect facade to the bitter, jealous person underneath? Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace as if my words had physically struck her. Richard's face darkened to a dangerous shade of red. That's quite enough. No, it's not enough, I continued, feeling years of suppressed words finally break free. You've all made me feel like an intruder since the day David brought me home. Nothing I do is ever right. My clothes aren't expensive enough. My background isn't prestigious enough. My career choice isn't ambitious enough. Margaret sniffed. We simply want what's best for David. No, you want what looks best for your social standing, I corrected her. You've never once asked what makes David happy, what makes us happy together. I looked at my husband, silently pleading with him to say something, to defend me just this once. But he stood frozen, caught between worlds. Emma, please, he finally managed. This isn't helping anything. What would help, David? Another 3 years of me trying to earn their approval. Another 3 years of you pretending everything is fine when we both know it's not? I reached into my purse, hanging on the back of the chair, and pulled out a small envelope. I'd been waiting for the right moment to share my news. This wasn't how I'd planned it, but nothing about this family ever went according to plan. I was going to wait until after dinner to announce this, but since I apparently don't get dinner, I opened the envelope and pulled out a small black and white photo, placing it on the table. Congratulations, you're going to be grandparents, and you, Jessica, will be an aunt. The silence that followed was deafening. David stared at the ultrasound photo, his expression shifting from anger to shock to something I couldn't quite read. You're pregnant? His voice cracked. 12 weeks, I confirmed. I found out last month. I wanted to be sure everything was healthy before telling anyone. Margaret recovered first. Well, this is unexpected. Is it really yours, David? Jessica asked, her eyes narrowing. I whirled on her. How dare you? David finally found his voice. Jessica, that's enough. Of course it's mine. I looked at my husband, searching his face for some sign that he was finally going to stand up for me, for us, for our child. He picked up the ultrasound photo, staring at it with wonder and confusion. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in months. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked quietly. I tried. 3 times in the last 2 weeks, but you were always too busy with work, or too tired, or too preoccupied with this dinner. I could see the truth of my words register on his face. He had been distant, preoccupied with a big case at his firm, but also increasingly pulled back into his family's orbit as the holidays approached. I'm going to be a father, he said, almost to himself. For a moment, the dining room seemed to fade away, and it was just the two of us. I remembered why I'd fallen in love with him. The genuine wonder in his eyes reminded me of the man I'd married, not the shadow he became around his family. This changes everything, Richard announced, breaking the moment. David, we need to discuss what this means for your future at the firm. A child requires stability, financial planning. What it means, I interrupted, is that I'm not going to let my child grow up feeling the way I've felt in this family. If things don't change, if David doesn't start standing up for us, then I'll be raising this baby on my own. The ultimatum hung in the air. I hadn't planned to say it, hadn't even fully formed the thought until the words were out, but I knew instantly it was true. I couldn't subject a child to this toxic environment. David looked stricken. Emma, you don't mean that. I do, I said quietly. I love you, David. I've loved you since the day we met. But I can't keep living like this, and I won't let our child grow up thinking this is what family means. The silence in the dining room was absolute. Even the Christmas music had ended, leaving only the sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the corner and the soft hiss of snowfall outside. David stared at me, his expression a mixture of fear and revelation, as if seeing clearly for the first time the crossroads we'd reached. Margaret was the first to break the silence. I think we should all calm down. Pregnancy hormones can make women quite emotional and irrational. I closed my eyes briefly, willing myself not to respond to her dismissive comment. When I opened them, I found David watching me, something shifting in his gaze. Mother, he said quietly, please don't. The single word fell like a stone into still water. Margaret's mouth opened in surprise, then closed again. "David," Richard began, his authoritative courtroom voice taking over, "this is hardly the time or place for—" "For what, Dad?" David interrupted. "For honesty? For finally acknowledging what's been happening in this family?" He looked around the table, then back at me. "I think it's exactly the time." Hope fluttered in my chest, but I tamped it down. I'd been disappointed too many times before. David picked up the ultrasound photo again, running his thumb gently over the grainy image of our child. Then, to my surprise, he pulled out his wallet and carefully placed the photo inside, next to the one of us from our honeymoon in Maine. A simple vacation we'd chosen because it was what we could afford at the time. "I've been a coward," he said, looking directly at me. "You're right about everything, Emma. I've let them treat you terribly because it was easier than standing up to them. I convinced myself I was keeping the peace, but all I was doing was betraying the promises I made to you." Jessica snorted. "Oh, please, David. She's clearly manipulating you with this pregnancy." I felt my face flush with anger, but before I could respond, David turned to his sister. "That's enough, Jessica. You've been cruel to Emma since day one, and I've allowed it because it was easier than confronting you. That ends today." Jessica's mouth fell open in shock. She looked to her parents for support, but David wasn't finished. "And yes, you knocked Emma's plate over on purpose. I saw you do it, just like I've seen all the accidents and deliberate slights over the years. I just pretended not to notice because it was easier." He turned to his mother next. "Mom, you've never given Emma a chance. You decided she wasn't good enough for me, for this family, without ever taking the time to know her. Do you have any idea how talented she is? How hard she works? How much joy she brings to people's lives with her food?" Margaret's face hardened. "David, I don't think you're being fair. We've welcomed Emma into our home repeatedly." "Welcomed?" I couldn't help myself. "You tolerated my presence because David insisted. That's not the same thing." David nodded. "She's right. When was the last time you asked Emma about her catering business, or showed any interest in her life at all?" Margaret had no answer. "And Dad," David continued, turning to his father, "you've made it clear from day one that Emma was a disappointment because she wouldn't advance my career the way marrying a judge's daughter or a partner's niece would have. But here's what you never understood. I didn't want to advance that way. I wanted to succeed on my own merits." Richard's face flushed. "Everything I've done has been for your benefit, to secure your future." "No," David shook his head. "It's been to secure your vision of my future. There's a difference." He looked around at his family, then back at me. Something had changed in his demeanor. He stood taller, his voice steadier than I'd ever heard it in this house. "I love Emma. I have since the moment I saw her explaining the difference between French and Italian meringue to a room full of bored executives. She was so passionate, so authentic, everything that was missing from my world." I felt tears prick at my eyes as he continued. "And now she's carrying our child, a child I hope will have her passion, her integrity, and her courage. God knows they won't get those qualities from my side of the family." "David," Margaret gasped, "that's a terrible thing to say." "It's the truth, Mom. This family talks about legacy and reputation, but what kind of legacy is it to teach my child that appearances matter more than honesty, that status matters more than character?" He walked around to my side of the table and took my hand. "Emma, I'm so sorry. Not just for tonight, but for every time I didn't stand up for you. For every time I chose their approval over your happiness." The sincerity in his eyes made my heart ache. This was the David I'd fallen in love with. The one I'd begun to fear was gone forever. "I want our child to be proud of their father," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And right now, I'm not sure I'm someone they could be proud of." "You can be," I whispered, squeezing his hand. "You are when you're truly yourself." Richard cleared his throat. "I think perhaps we should all take some time to cool down and—" "No, Dad," David interrupted again. "No more avoiding difficult conversations. No more pretending everything is fine when it isn't." He turned to face his family. "Things need to change. Either you accept Emma, Truly accept her as my wife and the mother of your grandchild, or you'll be seeing a lot less of me." "You can't mean that," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "We're your family." "Emma is my family too," David replied firmly. "And soon our child will be as well. I won't subject them to the same treatment Emma has endured." Jessica stood up, tossing her napkin onto the table. "This is ridiculous. You're choosing her over your own family." David looked at his sister steadily. "I'm choosing to be the kind of husband and father I should have been all along. If that means setting boundaries with all of you, then yes, that's what I'm doing." The snow was falling harder as David and I drove away from his parents' house, the wipers creating a hypnotic rhythm against the windshield. Neither of us had spoken since getting in the car. The weight of what had just happened hung between us like a physical presence. David had stood up to his family, really stood up to them, for the first time since I'd known him. After his ultimatum, Richard had asked us to leave. "Until you come to your senses," he'd said, as if David were a rebellious teenager rather than a 32-year-old man about to become a father. Margaret had tried a different approach, suddenly tearful, asking how we could ruin Christmas this way. Jessica had remained coldly furious, not even looking at us as we gathered our coats and left. As we reached the highway, David pulled off at a scenic overlook. Boston's skyline glittered in the distance, holiday lights reflecting off the freshly fallen snow. He turned off the engine and faced me. "I meant what I said back there," he began. "All of it. I've been a terrible husband, Emma." "Not terrible," I said softly. "Just lost. Like you became a different person whenever we crossed the threshold of that house." He nodded, staring out at the snow. "I've spent my whole life trying to meet their expectations. It becomes so automatic that you don't even realize you're doing it anymore." He turned to look at me, but seeing you stand up to them tonight, hearing you say you'd raise our child alone rather than subject them to that environment, it was like waking up from a long sleep. "I didn't want to give you an ultimatum," I said. "That wasn't my plan. But when I thought about our baby growing up feeling the way I've felt in your family, I know," he reached for my hand, "and you were right. I wouldn't want that either." He placed his other hand gently on my stomach. "I want our child to be brave, like their mother, to speak truth even when it's difficult." I covered his hand with mine. "I want them to know their father as the man I fell in love with, the real David Anderson, not the shadow that appears in that house." He smiled sadly. "I'm not sure I even know who that is anymore. I've been playing a role for so long." "I know who you are," I said. "You're the man who brought me soup for a week when I had the flu, even though you were terrified of getting sick before your big trial. You're the man who stayed up all night helping me practice for my certification exam. You're the man who still leaves me silly love notes in my cookbook margins." His eyes glistened in the dim light. "I don't deserve you, Emma." "It's not about deserving," I said. "It's about choosing. Every day we choose who we want to be and how we want to love." I squeezed his hand. "Tonight you chose us. That's all I've ever wanted." The city lights blurred through my tears as David pulled me close. We sat like that for a long time, the snow creating a cocoon around our car, around our little family. "What happens now?" I finally asked. David took a deep breath. "I honestly don't know. My parents might come around eventually, or they might not. Either way, we need to be clear about our boundaries." He brushed a strand of hair from my face. "But whatever happens with them, I promise you this. You and our child will always come first. Always. That's all I need," I whispered. We drove home in a comfortable silence. The weight between us transformed into something lighter, like possibility. As we pulled into our driveway, I suddenly remembered something. "David," I said, "we never had dinner." He laughed, a genuine laugh I hadn't heard in too long. "You're right, and you're eating for two now." 20 minutes later, we were sitting on our living room floor in front of our small Christmas tree, eating grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, comfort food from my childhood that I'd taught David to make during our first year together. "This is better than any fancy Christmas dinner," David said, dipping his sandwich into his soup. Even without the hand-selected Pemberton's turkey, I teased. He smiled, especially without it. As we ate, we talked about the baby, making plans and sharing dreams in a way we hadn't for months. David wanted to convert the spare room into a nursery, maybe paint it ourselves. I wanted to start a recipe book of family favorites to pass down to our child. Later, as we lay in bed, David's hand resting protectively over my still flat stomach, I realized something important had shifted. For years, I'd been trying to fit into David's world, to be accepted by his family. I'd thought that was what would make us whole, but real wholeness had nothing to do with his parents' approval or their social circle. It was here, in this moment, in the family we were creating together. "Merry Christmas, Emma," David whispered, already half asleep. "Merry Christmas," I replied, nestling closer to him. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering everything in a clean white blanket. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be fallout from tonight, relationships to rebuild or let go of, boundaries to maintain. But for the first time in years, I felt completely certain about one thing. Whatever came next, we would face it together. Not as David the Anderson heir and Emma the outsider, but as David and Emma, partners and soon-to-be parents, creating our own family with our own values. And that was the greatest Christmas gift I could have asked for. The last thing I remembered before drifting off to sleep was the image of David standing tall in his parents' dining room, finally choosing us. Sometimes, I realized, the most powerful words aren't spoken in grand declarations or heated arguments. Sometimes, they're as simple as "just stay quiet, don't ruin the evening," and the courage to stand up anyway.